Sounds good. Hi, welcome everyone. If it's your first time joining us, thank you for being here. And everyone else, welcome back. So as we mentioned, we love to have a hello in the chat and hear where you're coming from. Feel free to drop your location and weather details if you'd like. I'm Anna Brazeitite. I'm the Education Director at Christina T. Miller Sustainable Jewelry Consulting, where we provide strategy, guidance, and education on responsible sourcing and sustainability for the jewelry industry. So if you'd like to find out more about the consultancy, you can check out our website, which we'll drop in the chat. So this is the living room. It's an informal virtual hangout to support community and connection around issues related to responsible sourcing in jewelry. We cover a different topic every month, and we love to hear from everyone. So you can feel free to share any feedback or future topics you'd like to discuss with the form on our website. Thank you to everyone who has showed up to have this conversation. And thank you to those who have contributed with the pay what you want option. We're so happy to be able to provide these sessions. So thank you for helping us make that possible. A little bit of housekeeping. So we're recording the session. These videos will be in the public realm. You're always welcome to speak up and ask questions or put them in the chat. But when you're not speaking, please stay muted. If you're sending private messages, keep it kind as always. Private chat should be respectful of participants' personal space. If you have any questions or comments throughout our discussion today, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on those. Remember to subscribe to our email list to stay up to date with our goings on and future sessions. So the link is there in the chat as well. Our next session will be on March 18th. As always, it is now the third Friday of every month. And now I'll hand it over to Christina.
Thanks, Anna. So maybe just drop in the chat if you were able to be part of the session that we did last month in January, or if you were able to watch the recording, or if you've maybe like 1, you saw it, or 0, you have no idea, what we did in the last session. Okay, great. So a lot of you were here. A couple of you weren't. So the recording's available on our website with the living room sessions, and I think it's one that you can share with people. Send them the link. There was a lot that was useful in what Sherry Torres was able to work with us on this idea of conversations worth having. And the big idea was, how do you frame conversations that you're having in a positive, productive light? So the tools that she provided helped us kind of take care of that, kind of how to work on it. So we'll do a little review of that. But in the course of having the conversation, we wanted to acknowledge where the conversation migrated in kind of the second part, or the last third of the conversation. And it was really revealing and significant and important about the challenges that still exist in the jewelry industry for a lot of people, and where they're missing out, not feeling represented, not feeling acknowledged, aren't being acknowledged, aren't being treated respectfully, and so on. So what we wanted to say is that we're working also on our own. It was a bit of a call to action. And we wanted to share that some of the core commitments that we've been making as a small business, Anna and Cecilia and I, what we can do from our business to create a more diverse and inclusive environment. So one is, making sure that this is a safe space, but we're going to stay committed to having some of these direct conversations, and not just, and when we do that, especially when it comes around sourcing, we try really hard to make sure representatives from impacted communities can be present. They can't always join via Zoom. And so when that's the case, we will try to make advanced interviews or have conversations so that we can bring their points of view to the conversation. Then when it comes to these living room sessions in particular, we will continue to ensure, to the absolute best of our ability, that it is a safe environment for you to be able to share what you need to share. And there we go. So that you can share what you need to share, and that we can work together through some of these conversations that might be more challenging. They might be a bit uncomfortable, but if we don't have them, we're doing a disservice and we're perpetuating existing inequities and injustices. So we want to uplift the industry. We want this community to thrive. We want to show positive ways of moving forward together. And so we're also always welcome to your suggestions and your ideas. Something else that we're doing is we want to create, and it's something that I think will be useful for all of you too, is our internal tools that can signal out to the world what our commitment looks like. So one of those tools is called an inclusion rider. And it's kind of like if you have insurance and you're going on vacation, you have health insurance and you're going on an adventure vacation, you have to get an extra rider on your insurance so that you're extra protected if you want to jump out of an airplane or something like that. So in this case, the additional rider would mean you already have a contract when you work with someone hires you to participate in a large conference, or someone wants you to partner with them. You can have something called an inclusion rider, which basically says, I have conditions to my willingness to work with you. And my conditions are going to include, our conditions are going to include inquiry about the diversity of the organization through which we're contracting our services. So we can work on that. We'll be working on that in a little bit more detail going forward. But what the idea is to encourage others to think about what they're doing and how they're presenting themselves in the industry and how we can move them to do so differently. Finally, we are going to be using the living room platform, hopefully later this spring, to revisit this conversation in an intentional, committed way. And we'll be working on that with you to make sure that we can host a living room session that is coordinated, it is collaborative, and what we're doing is trying to lift all boats in this instance, but obviously put the work in for inclusivity, diversity, tackling racism in the jewelry industry head on. So there's a little bit of feedback coming in the chat. We'd love to hear from you if you have any thoughts on some of those ideas that I just ran through. And you can probably tell by the way that I'm presenting that it's a work in progress. It's something that we're still kind of testing out and figuring out how we follow through on our commitments. So we look forward to your feedback and holding us accountable to the things that we're promising to do. Okay, so let's get this show moving. We have a quick poll to do with you using a tool called Mentimeter. So Cecilia, let's drop what we'd like you to do. This is we're going to do a couple little interactive exercises today. So I just dropped a link into the chat. And
coming right up. Give me 2 seconds.
Yep.
Okay.
So we have 2 quick questions for you to answer.
So if you go to menti.com, please plug in the code 37405577. Christina, if you can plug that into the chat, because I kind of can't see much right now.
Okay. Can you say it one more time?
3740. Actually, I think I have it here.
5577.
Yes, I put it in the chat.
Great.
And I will also share my screen so that we can all see what's going on. You guys are seeing in the screen the results, correct or not? Yes, okay. But I'll share here anyway. So which Tucson show was your favorite? Let's see what you guys think. Okie doke. All righty. Ethical Gem Fair, yay. All righty, awesome. Oh, these other guys, they are doomed. AGTA, GJX.
This might be a slightly biased pool of
totally. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. And this is going to be fun. This is like the first question that we have of a couple more using this new system.
I think we have one more before we get into the conversations worth having, where we're going to check and see how people felt about practicing it if they were in Tucson.
Okay.
So you can go to the next question.
Yes, I will. So next question, guys. How did you feel practicing conversations worth having techniques? Just, you know, what did you feel? Was it daunting, easy, challenging? Just put any emotions that you felt there. Oh, I had to do this. Go ahead. I think I had to unlock something. Oh, here we go. Challenging, empowering. You can keep going. Helpful, hard, exhausting. Challenging, faked a little confidence. Interesting. Engaging, a little nervous, empowered.
Better with a friend. Like that one.
This is good. Cool. Better with a friend, totally, yes. Positive, excellent, refreshing. Awesome, thank you.
That was great. Okay. So I'm going to hand it to Anna to talk through some slides. So
yeah, so we're gonna, just for anyone who would like the refresher or for anyone who wasn't able to attend the last session, we might use like a couple of these phrases. So just wanted to make sure everyone knows what we're referring to. I'll do my best. Sherry explains this really well, of course, but the main idea of the process of the conversations worth having is kind of this threefold approach of first naming the problem or the issue that you see as being present. So, you know, something to do with our suppliers. In some of the examples we went through might have been, you know, my supplier doesn't care about sustainability. So naming that problem. the next step you want to take is pause and flip it to the positive opposite of that statement. And then frame your point of view for what you wish the desired outcome to be. So if you go to the next slide, Cecilia, thank you. Here's just a quick example of that. So you approach an initial conversation with the mindset of, oh, they probably don't care about responsible sourcing. If you pause and kind of flip that thinking to, oh, you do care about responsible sourcing, and then you try to approach it from that perspective, the frame that you build for the conversation then is that you understand each other's perspective and begin thinking of this situation as a win-win where you both move toward more responsible sourcing, right? So once you have that positive framing, Sherry taught us to ask questions that would widen the screen. So meaning, what questions can you then ask from the framework of that positive perspective to make the invisible visible and form that shared understanding with this person, and to generate new knowledge and inspire possibilities. So this is the whole getting really curious part. Where this lands us in this kind of graph that is the quadrant of conversations worth having, right? So that is above the line that divides appreciative versus depreciative conversations. So we can think of appreciative conversations as the ones that are more productive, lead to more positive outcomes. And then it's on the right side of this statement versus inquiry line as well. So we're in a place where we can kind of see eye to eye a little better, and we can get curious about the other person's perspective and learn from each other. So if it's possible to get to this place with somebody, then this is where we can have conversations worth having that are really productive. So that's our quick review, and we'll get started on our main conversation today.
Thanks, Anna. So we want to welcome warmly Ashley Thorne, Zulaikha Aziz, Jalnar Dhanani-Wade, Will Nevins-Alderfer. We're really glad to have the four of you with us today. I'm going to switch for a second to the gallery view on the recording so you can give a wave so everybody can see who you are. Thanks. And we also have, I'll add, because we have a couple suppliers on the call, you might be able to add some information, to this conversation too. So Monica and Stuart Poole, Monica Stephenson and Stuart Poole, just Stuart's not on camera, but we see you. Thanks. So for what we would like to do is kind of go around the room a little bit. Imagine a panel style scenario with Ashley and Zulaikha and Jalnar and Will. And we have a couple questions for you to kind of get you warmed up and started. And so to save a little time, instead of doing introducing yourself right now, as the question comes to you, why don't you just say a little bit about kind of where you fall in the jewelry industry, kind of what your role is, and something that you would like to share. So I'm going to hand it to Anna and to lead off with the first question.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so kind of a general opening question for everybody. For your experiences that went well in speaking with suppliers during the shows, what specifically stood out to you? And then what continues to feel a little bit challenging? Let's start with, how about Jalnar? I see you unmuted already, and then we'll just go around to everybody else.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jalnar Dhanani-Wade. I am a jeweler, a goldsmith, Palestinian and Indian. I was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I lived there till I was 18 and then moved to New York, and now I'm in Philly. So I have had a fun experience all over the country. I would say that this was my second experience going to Tucson, first of all. So my first experience was in 2020, and I was extremely overstimulated. It was like, it was all a lot all at once. But this time, my favorite part was the ethical gem fair. Obviously, I think everybody in this room kind of feels similarly, because it was so easy to have the conversations, right? Because like you were already set up in a room where everybody wanted to have those conversations. So it was super easy to like immediately go in and connect on the stories in ways that I felt like I had to pry in other shows. So specifically, I really liked being able to find like traceable versions of everything, and then being able to talk to the person back until it was traced. So that was my favorite part. I like had much more fun at the ethical gem fair than the other ones.
Great. Someone else go ahead and jump in. Yeah,
I
Ashley.
can go. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's really nice to be here. So yeah, I'm very grateful to be able to share with everyone. I have a jewelry line, AM Thorne Jewelry, and I'm based in Washington, DC, and I specialize in gemstones with character. And I really enjoy being able to work directly with my customers and kind of be able to provide more of the backstory of the journey of the materials and share that with them. So going to Tucson for the first time was a really it was a really great experience for me. I think going to the ethical gem fair, definitely, that was the first place that I went when I got to Tucson. And my experience there, I really connected well, first and foremost, with people. And that for me is always like what I'm looking for when I start a new relationship with vendors, even though at the ethical gem fair, like I knew a lot of the people there. I was like really excited to visit Anza and speak with Monica because I was sourcing a sapphire for someone. So yeah, it was very easy to like have engaging conversations at the ethical gem fair. And that was like my first experience going to a gem show at Tucson, and then warming up to going to AGTA was like slightly a different experience for me. I love gemstones with character. So I was really looking at sourcing salt and pepper diamonds. And I think that I kind of am learning that when sourcing diamonds, like I'm having to be a little bit more like I'm asking questions, but at the same time, I'm realizing it can be really challenging to get answers that I'm looking for. So I'm still like learning how to navigate those conversations in like a really like mindful way that leads to like even the person on the opposite end feeling comfortable to share with me. Yeah, I'm still like having difficulty getting down to like origin information, and a lot of what the responses I got were about like that it's hard even for them to be able to share that information. But something that made me really hopeful is that a lot of vendor, well, not a lot, but one particular vendor kind of has a model in place of like what they are most proud of, like with their diamonds, and that they are hoping to be able, like that's kind of their business model of what they are trying to achieve with all of their diamonds. So it really like meant a lot to me to know like where they're trying to go, but also being very understanding to the challenges that they have as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Ashley. And we'll probably get into a little more of the like what is challenging a little later as well. Yeah, how about Zulaikha next? What for the experiences that went well, what really stood out to you, and what continues to feel a little challenging?
Hi everyone, I'm Zulaikha Aziz and my jewelry brand is called Mazari, and I make fine jewelry inspired by my Afghan heritage and my work in human rights. So I'm really mindful about the materials I use, only fair mined gold and mainly colored gemstones, which are responsibly sourced. And I've only been in operation for about a year, not really a year yet. And all of the gemstones I had bought up until Tucson were virtually through suppliers that I had connected with online, like Stuart, who all my sapphires and rubies and a bunch of my stones are from. So like everybody else, I really, really enjoyed the ethical gem fair. I loved connecting with Monica, and I was able to get a Moyo stone, which I really fell in love with. And I had also purchased through Columbia Gem House and through Haywan. And so just meeting everybody at Gary Treasures, meeting everybody in person was really wonderful. And other than the ethical gem fair, because as Ashley and Jalnar already mentioned, I felt very comfortable in that environment. I felt like I could ask the questions and I wouldn't be looked at with like blank stares, and people would know why I was asking about the origins, not because I was questioning necessarily the authenticity of the stone or even questioning other motives in supplying the stones, but because I really wanted to get down to the story and the impact on the communities and both, you know, the people and the environment and all of that. And I felt like it was an understood area that I didn't have to really explain. For me, unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the session, the living room session before Tucson, and this was my very first Tucson experience as well. So I found that navigating some of the conversations with suppliers I didn't have a history with was a bit challenging, and twofold. One, that some of the suppliers, the new suppliers I was beginning to have conversations with was in a group setting. So sometimes you could bounce off other people in the group and, you know, try to get around the issue and get to a point where everybody kind of understood that we were asking these questions for ourselves and also our consumer base and the, you know, clients that come to us and what's important to them. But then some of the newer suppliers that I encountered on my own, I found it a little bit challenging getting past the, hi, I'm just, you know, I'm a jeweler and I'm interested in these stones. And there's, you know, that whole, a little bit of a disconnect when you don't know somebody and you're starting to ask them questions about their stones. And I did feel a little bit of defensiveness with some of the suppliers I encountered. So for me, it was really, you know, getting past that and getting towards asking some more questions and seeing whether it would lead to having a conversation. And that was, you know, a supplier that I would want to come and revisit and discuss further with. And even if they didn't have all of the right answers, if they seemed willing to engage in that conversation and help me navigate, you know, with the various stones that they had, or maybe show, oh, these stones I'm more confident in where they were mined or how I was able to access them versus these stones I have very limited information from. I appreciated that because then I knew that they were being upfront with me. And some suppliers, you know, just a handful, I would say maybe 2 or 3 that I encountered, it was very closed off from the very beginning. I could tell that they didn't want to have the conversation and they were almost dismissive. And I kept note of that as well. Obviously, I wouldn't go back to having discussions with those suppliers because I just didn't feel comfortable talking to them. So that was a challenge.
Yeah, well, definitely relating to a lot of the things y'all are mentioning. Thanks for sharing. And Will, let's have you give a little introduction as well and share a little bit about what stood out and what was challenging.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. And hello, everyone. Loving the conversation. I've started the conversation already. I'm Will. Started WR Middle Arts 6 years ago, full time at least. And we're based up here in Vermont, Southern Vermont. And kind of focusing on custom bridal stuff or jewelry, mostly rings, but trying to roll out collections and lines as well with our own brand. And yeah, it was just awesome and such an honor to be able to attend Tucson for the first time this year. And just, yeah, I guess what really stood out for me is the power of connection and kind of meeting people in person. Kind of like what everyone's saying is being able to meet in person and like formalize that connection in that way. And then also meet people and kind of like hear more of the stories behind either the pieces or about the businesses, about the people. And what keeps coming up in our own work and kind of branding, marketing, all those things is the constant theme is stories. So how that relates on the kind of the sourcing side of like, where's the stone coming from? Where's the metal coming from? And all the people involved in that. So I guess that stood out as like a powerful part as well as a challenge to kind of uncover all that sometimes. And I think that's why like, yeah, the Ethical Gem Supplier show was awesome because it was easier to have those conversations. A lot of those conversations were already started. But the other profound thing for me was, yeah, the power of word of mouth. And like, if someone recommended like, oh, that's a good supplier, or like I got a sapphire last year from them, how powerful that was. And I really appreciate that. And I feel like Tucson was such a different experience for me this year than it could have been if I hadn't had those connections. And so I think for me, it's also still a challenge of how do you approach new vendors that you don't have that connection with or that recommendation for. And why is that? Is that just happenstance or is there a reason for that? And then off of that, and thinking about that, it was like also how does that like, thinking about claims and marketing and all the people out there trying to do good work or people who are not so much and are more profit focused only. I feel like that connections support proof of like values because you see people over time, or that's why I like the relational piece of that. Like over time, you kind of see a glimpse of people's values again and again, and then that kind of forms that story of that person or that company. I think that's all my thoughts on that.
That's great. So I love that you just used the word relational. That kind of leads me to the next thing I wanted to ask everybody. We kind of discussed at the last session this idea of making our conversations a little more relational and less transactional, which can be really challenging when we are doing business with somebody, right? It is in the end about a transaction, but were there any tips either from the Conversations Worth Having approach or anything else that you found that kind of worked really well in creating that more relational conversation with vendors, whether it was, you know, asking certain questions or, you know, just anything else to kind of make it more conversational feeling. Yeah, Ashley, did you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. So I did attend the session before I went to Tucson, the living room session with Sherry. And I really enjoyed that because it really taught me how to like kind of lead like in a very like positive, lead like conversations in a positive way. And again, like I was saying, like I really enjoy connecting with people. So kind of getting the conversation started in a way that I could have the other, like the vendor kind of share with me like what they're most proud of. Like I think one of the questions I asked a vendor was like, what are you most proud of when it comes to transparency with your moonstones? And I could tell like asking him that question kind of like lit him up to feel excited to share something like that he felt really proud of and good about in his business. And that's like what led me to being able to like source a particular moonstone from him, because he was most proud of a particular moonstone because he could trace it back to the mine and had more information, which then like, you know, kind of like opens up like asking more questions. And actually I was referred to him like from somebody from the ethical gem fair. So I kind of felt like I knew that he would be a little bit more open to having like a deeper conversation about origin. But like one other thing I wanted to share was there's someone that I was talking with to source a diamond, and I just found it really interesting because I really wanted to like make this purchase, but it was the dealer on his end who wanted to actually like do more of the investigation, because I did have questions and he willingly like wanted to get answers from me, and it wasn't about just doing a transaction. And it actually led him to finding out information that he didn't feel comfortable with selling the diamond to me. So I really appreciated that because even though I loved the stone and I was willing to purchase it, I actually didn't end up buying it. And like that meant something to me because I started a relationship like with building trust with someone who wasn't going to just sell me something to sell it. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I love that example, Ashley. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And anyone else have examples of conversations that went in a more relational way as that?
Yeah, I found it like kind of to be there. It was either going to happen or it wasn't going to happen. So like, I don't feel like the technique super helped me get somebody who wasn't particularly willing to have that conversation into a place where they were willing to have that conversation. Because like just because I thought it was a conversation worth having didn't mean that they agreed with me. So like, it was basically like, once I established that, because I also just felt like it was really emotionally exhausting to go through all these shows for several days in a row, trying to make relationships the whole time. So I personally found it like I would ask a few questions up front, and based on their vibe, I would decide whether or not I was going to expend that energy or not. I think one of the first questions I would ask most often was like, can you just tell me a little bit about these stones? And just, it's such an open-ended question that depending on what they want to talk about, it kind of gives me an idea of like what I can ask them about the stone. So I asked them, you know, do you know anything about where the rough was mined? Do you know anything about the mining facility? Do you know anything about the cutting facility? But I start with like as open-ended and as nice of a tone as I can muster. It also super helped when there were more than one of us, so that it didn't seem like there was one very inquisitive person. It just seemed like a group of people who were interested about the story of the stone. I think that connection of not being immediately so transactional can be really helpful in the right context. But it was very clear, like, if that was going to happen or not, pretty immediately for me.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes you have to see who is going to meet your energy in the right way. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it super helpful too to like, if someone had specific questions to then riff off those questions. And that was nice, as well as, I mean, in the moment talking to vendors, but then also afterwards, it was kind of nice to have that accountability of a group to be like, what are your policies around sourcing diamonds or sapphires, to kind of keep that accountability, because there is so much of like, you know, if you're trying to buy 4 clients and you have their ethic, all their kind of different levels of metrics, and then you have your own, and then there's all the accessibility of Tucson. Yeah, it's just good to kind of keep questioning that and keep pushing it. Because everyone, I feel like so many people had, I may be distracted from the questions, but I feel like so many people had like this is where I get the rough, or this is what we can source now, but these are our hopes. There's a lot of hopes or like half quantified claims, which is like good, and I want to support those, especially the positive ones of like trying to do better. But then where do you draw the line of like, you know, I really need it up to here before I can commit to it, or where do you say like, yeah, that's okay if there's like progress in that direction. So I feel like having the group to kind of keep playing with those ideas was really helpful, to kind of keep pushing those conversations as well.
Yeah, great point. Go ahead, Zulaikha.
I wanted to add that was important to me in trying to establish relationships with new vendors or making more of an effort was I really wanted to dig a little bit deeper with vendors of color from communities of color internationally or here in the US. And I really found that dichotomy between AGTA and GJX, some of the vendors, and then also Pueblo, some of the vendors that I had access to who actually came from the communities with the stones that they were providing. And sometimes they didn't have the same language that maybe the vendors at AGTA did, or, you know, the correct claims to make, but they still knew where their stones were coming from and they knew the mining communities. And so it took more of an effort maybe to dig a little bit deeper, but that was really important to me. And it was just something I wanted to point out, that it's not as easy to reach those folks, but, you know, it's still possible.
Can I jump in?
Oh, sorry. Go.
I was just going to ask, I would like to run with this moment a little bit, because what Zulaikha just surfaced is the additional effort that it takes. I've heard a couple of things like, you know, it's really helpful to be introduced. It's really helpful to go as a community. It's really helpful, like when you already have the parameters of the ethical gem fair, for instance, you sort of know you're walking into a safe space. But what Zulaikha just surfaced is the real work happens actually when we go outside of our comfort zone and really try things in a different space. So did any of you have similar, did you give it a whirl? You know, did you try out some of those maybe less comfortable because maybe there's a language barrier, maybe you just didn't feel as familiar, or it wasn't anything you had tried to do before? Did any of you kind of stretch in that direction at all?
I tried. There were a number of vendors that I approached, and I had varying results. Some people, I approached one vendor and they, you know, didn't want to have that conversation, and I don't think they understood where it was coming from. And sometimes that's because these conversations aren't had in the spaces in which they operate. So I understand that, and I would need to continue with a dialogue, or maybe if language is a barrier, then, you know, figure out how to really go about communicating why it's so important to me. Because if we don't make those, you know, if we don't kind of rise to that challenge, or if we don't try to let certain vendors know what's important to us, then it just ends the communication right there, and you can't influence in a way or communicate what's the values that are important, so that if they want to be providing stones for certain suppliers, or if they want to increase their scope, or if they want to do things the right way, then it gives them a little bit of an impetus to begin doing that.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that that's something I heard over and over again, was this notion of like, the more people that ask, the more people that put pressure on each individual company, the more that tends to be at the forefront, and willingness to have conversation. And I also think, I agree, I think it's actually really important, and it's a great opportunity for us as small jewelers to do something that bigger companies are just not capable of. Like, for example, from Agera Gems from Haiwan, I got just like a really small batch of traceable emeralds, and they're all different sizes and they're like different colors, but I'm going to make some beautiful pieces with them. I know where they came from. I know her whole story. Bigger companies need like 1,000 pieces of calibrated stone. They can't do stuff like this. They just can't. And so like, while it is harder for us to navigate sometimes and more time consuming and more energy, it is, I think, really important for us to establish these relationships with the smaller vendors so we can grow with them.
It's the point that you just made, Jalnar, about the size of the company and the way that you operate changes where you fit and what you can offer in terms of who you're purchasing from. So I know that is, it'll be interesting as we move on with this conversation, but from the suppliers like Monica and Stuart, there is this space where there's more material out there's so much material out there that is available in the world to be able to, to be purchasing. And so how do you leverage, if our goal is to create change, then how do you make sure you're leveraging your purchasing decisions in such a way that lean on the unique area where you can make a difference? So Jalnar, you're not going to be buying, 3,000 X size blahs, to set in a large run or something. You're doing one-off, and that might be the place where, who knows, you might have gotten one support for one miner, really solid in that arrangement. We have another little poll that we could do to make sure we hear from all of you. So if you would entertain another look. The question that we have is about anyone else that was there. If you got to use the techniques, what was the most challenging while you were trying to practice the conversations worth having techniques? So just take a minute and we'll watch your answers come to life. I think we need to drop the stuff in there again. Hold on so that you can get there. And then the number is at the top of the slide. Here you go. There we go.
This is a fun new thing. It's a fun new way to get some interactions with y'all.
So interesting.
Okay, looks like we're all pretty good at trying to have a positive mindset. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. This is very cool.
Yeah, thanks. I think that the challenging assumptions strikes me as one of the most challenging pieces of this, because sometimes you don't have, you are who you are, we are who we are. We are the sum of our experiences. We are who we are in a very particular point in time. So sometimes it's tricky to know what you're bringing to the table that is an assumption. So Anna, I'm going to toss it back to you before we go into kind of group discussion to see if there's anything else in particular you were hoping to hear from our guests.
I think that we kind of touched on this, but I was curious for anyone else who wanted to add if there were any specific signs from new vendors you were meeting that kind of told you like, okay, this is somebody I want to form more of a relationship with, even if it wasn't in the moment. Personally, I found that it was like really challenging for me, who's kind of an introvert, to really try to get into those conversations on the spot. So I was taking it more, I was taking more of an approach as like, I'm kind of just doing a little reconnaissance and taking note of signs here and there of people I'd like to connect with later on. Is there anyone who kind of, were you looking for any specific signs from how even the start of a conversation went with a vendor?
For me, I think I was looking at their genuine interest in telling me about, you know, the pathways of their various stones, or answering my questions, or the back and forth. If I was able to feel a spark of interest, or, you know, just wanting to know what the concerns were so that they could address them with some of their other stones, show me other options, that made me feel more comfortable in coming back to them and asking them more questions, and then wanting to connect with them after the shows were finished, and exploring ways that maybe we could work together with not one set of stones, but another set of stones. So those were the cards that I kept and that I made notes of, who to, you know, recontact and who to continue the conversations with. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the folks who seemed to close off, then I just, you know, didn't feel like it was worth pushing as much.
I just wanted to share one. Yeah, I fully agree with that. I wanted to share one interaction that I had. I was with my friend Maddie of Madeline Jewelry, who is an amazing person to go to the show with, because she is a pro at asking questions. And she was asking the sunstone dealer a bunch of questions, and he seemed like he had been asked the questions and he was kind of like answering. And then she asked him, have you ever been to the cutting facility? And his response was so like, he was like, I would, like, I'm not gonna go to India. And like that whole energy was such a put off that I was like, I'm not buying anything from this man. And I like wanted to, I mean, we did walk away shortly after that. It was just like, he thought he had all the right answers. And then his reaction towards like a standard question, in my opinion, was like appalled. And it was just a clear sign to walk away.
Oof, yeah, red flag for sure. We're definitely gonna kind of continue that thread shortly. Just want to make sure if Ashley or Will have anything to add. And then I'd also, not to put y'all on the spot, but we have Stuart and Monica here as well. So if you have anything to add about like kind of what that experience was like from your side of, you know, what were the really, what were the positive new connections like? Let's do that.
I'll just say for me though, I feel like I wish that I had more time in Tucson to start off with, because I feel like I was just really warming up when it was time to go. I was there for how many, like four real days. It wasn't enough time, but I think that, I mean, in all honesty, like the vendors that I walked up to that really, it's like whether I was expecting it or not, were able to engage with me in a way where they were like wanting to share. Like that really kept me wanting to stay and look and ask questions. And yeah, that really kind of made me feel good about engaging with that vendor. And then I think even with you, Anna, and I don't know if Will was there, but we were like as a group walking around, and like I think just like asking about like information about the mines to like a moonstone, and like I felt like it felt like a little bit like awkward and weird, like the interaction felt a little bit awkward at first, because on the other end, the person like didn't really have any answers. It was almost as if they'd never been asked these questions, and having to like then go and ask someone else, and kind of giving us like the best answers that they could. Like, I really did also appreciate that. And I found myself having like, no judgment for like receiving the answers that they gave, because I just appreciated it so much that they like tried to answer questions. And then I remember like asking a bit about like, I forget what the question was exactly, but maybe like if they had been to the mines. And sorry, my light went out. But they made it seem as if like it was dangerous at the mines, and that like I feel like many times can feel like a red flag for me. But then I like quickly learned that it had nothing to do with the actual mining site, that it had to do more with like the land. And so it just kind of made me like just kind of want to like be a little bit more how do I say, like just empathetic to like what is really going on, and just appreciate the honesty. Sorry that my light is out. I can't.
That's okay, Ashley. I remember this interaction you're referring to, and I remember feeling that like at first being like they're being kind of very vague in their answers, and that to me at first was like a very questionable thing. But yeah, as you say, like I think they just didn't know exactly how to explain it, because turns out it had to do with like a probably very complex territory issue. And their willingness to even try to explain it to us, I think was a good sign, like you said. Will, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I'll just keep it short because I'm excited to hear from Monica and Stuart as well. But I think definitely honesty and transparency is what I was looking for when I first went. But then once I got there, like again, I mean, we know this from ethical metalsmiths, but just like the nuances and the complexity of it still amazed me. So it was great to just like, hear the honesty and also hear people's passion. I feel like that was what got me really excited, because you could hear how invested they are in a project or in their livelihood. And then, it seemed like everyone, I try to ask that question a lot too, like, where's the rough mine? How are you associated with the mine? It seemed like everyone owned a mine that we went and talked to, and then as you ask more about that, it's like often they just were partners in a stake in a mine, or 10 other people or 20 other people were running the mine for them. So it was just helpful to kind of hear people talk about it in their own words, so you get a sense of what that relationship is like as well.
Oh, and quick note, Zulaikha had to go, but thank you for being here. And Monica, would you like to jump on for a little bit and give us your side of this experience a little?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for always gathering kind of these important conversations, and for letting me know that this is a topic pretty important to me and to us. So I have to say Tucson was incredible for us, for Anza, for Moyo, for Megan, my associate, who's here here in the room as well. It was incredibly energizing to see people after 2 years of no interaction. And I'm sorry, but there is something magical that happens with gemstones in the palm of your hand or in your hand when you're face to face. I think we have done a really good job of like that kind of oh shit moment, 2+ years ago, of how are we going to tell our story? How are we going to connect with people about these gems? How are we going to keep the communities that depend on us going when we're not sure the next time we can show a gem, or how are we going to sell a gem? And I think most of us were able to figure out ways to effectively communicate with people in the last 2 years. But there is no substitute for seeing people in person, asking these questions and reading their body language face to face. And then just the alchemy that happens when you are in front of like a table full or a case full of gems. I'm sorry, it's beautiful. There's a reason why we do what we do. And so it was just so energizing to kind of be there and actually be in that moment again, finally, after so much time and so much anticipation. So thank many of you for coming multiple times. Some of you, I see you, like I know you visited multiple times, so appreciate that. You know, it's not enough, you know, just to say, here's the ethical gem fair and here's my sapphires. You know, we were set up in that room with those suppliers to have the conversations of like, I always have a little bit of this uncomfortableness with the word ethical. It's a big word for me. And so the fact that where the ethical gem fair is already just a little bit uncomfortable for me. And so the opportunity, though, as people came up and had these conversations to say exactly why we're there, why we are here, why we do what we do, and how we do it to some extent. We had those conversations over and over again, and with a lot of you and our community that we've been connecting with, but with a lot of new people as well. So that was actually really interesting to see that there were people who had never heard of us and who had never, like, didn't have a connection to necessarily anyone in that room, but they were there and they were searching, they were digging, they were looking. And hopefully, because again, we predate some of the other more, you know, hardcore gem shows, they had a chance to kind of practice like those narratives and seeing like what people are about before they have to go and like elbow their way into a case at GJX and kind of figure out how to navigate that conversation. So I felt fortunate that we had conversations with new people, and that maybe we had the opportunity to lay groundwork for people who are not always in these living room sessions, or who are not members of Ethical Metalsmiths already, or somewhere where they've been coached or practiced and like learning to ask these questions. We had this opportunity to kind of like, these are the things that you should be knowing and asking, and these are the conversations you can keep having. So, so we were grateful for that. And I think to some extent, you know, reading like Gina's question here, you know, about there's always, storytelling is great, but it's ultimately not quite enough either. Like, and a goal for us at Anza this year is, I would really like to be able to verify in more concrete ways the claims that we are making, the stories that we are telling. I really want to be able to actually objectively, quantifiably be able to kind of give you that information. And I think a few of us who've started early with like changing our business models or creating a business model that's a more advantageous beneficiary kind of business model, we have the experience of, we've been doing it in practice. Now, how do we actually take it to that next level of being able to actually prove our claims and be able to give you more of that information? And again, I'm looking at you, Christina, like we may need some help in being able to actually do this and quantify it. I'm grateful that a lot of people don't necessarily need all of that, and they take us at our word to some extent. But I would like to kind of continue that push towards, it just makes everyone a little more careful and a little more thoughtful about what they're saying about things. Those are just some of my thoughts. Yeah, the inclusion rider also has me like very excited. So, and also happy belated birthday, Christina. So, so those are my thoughts. And actually, the moment of the most emotion probably of the entire show for me was watching Stuart Poole walk in the door as a surprise to the Gem Fair. So with that, I'm going to transfer this over, segue to Stuart, who made me cry when he walked in. So there you go.
Thanks, Monica. I'm not going to go on video. My connection here today is not so great. I hope you can all hear me, but please put something in the chat if you can. I think Monica has very eloquently covered many of the main points and the way that we felt about how the fair went and the interaction with everyone who attended. One thing I think that we tried to do from the outset is, of course, make our event something really quite relaxed. And so that when some of the other fairs and things are, even for some of the Tucson veterans, I think they're quite high pressure. There's a lot of trading going on, and there's a lot, not so much opportunity maybe, or not the feeling that you have the opportunity to talk about the types of things that we want to talk about, that everyone here on the the panel today has been mentioning. So I think that was one of the key things, that we always want to keep that atmosphere in the Ethical Gem Fair, that whatever questions you're coming with, we've got time. You've got time, we've got time. We'll answer those questions to the best of of our ability. And so I think that's one of the core things that we try to do. And I know that there's a lot of love in the room today for the Ethical Gem Fair, so I'd like to thank you for that. It was great for me. As Monica just alluded to, my appearance was very last minute, and I think that gave me an interesting perspective this time around, because I wasn't selling, I didn't have a table, I wasn't coordinated enough to make that happen, but I got myself there, and not being in the kind of selling mode, if you like, I was very much in the conversational mode. And so I had the opportunity to sit down at the tables, talk with people at some length in certain cases, just about the things that we're doing, the things that I'm doing personally, that with my company, with my business partners, but what we're doing in a group with the ethical gem suppliers, all of the some ideas that we have for development. So again, I think just building on this this approach, that it's very open, it's very relaxed. You can come here with questions, and I hope that coming into the room, because the other people in that group are, and I know I'm biased, but they are lovely people, all of them, and that's why I'm working with them. And we all care about doing business in the right way. All of the topics, I'm not going to repeat those here, but we're on the same page. And so what I really hope for this group, and for all of the few hundred people that came and had conversations with us at the Scottish Rite, then they could use that as a good a practicing ground, a good kind of entry session, if you like, all of those things, just to be able to speak freely, so that when they went to some of the other shows that we mentioned, that they had already kind of got themselves into the right groove. They practiced their questions, they thought through some of the answers, they probably refined a little bit about what they wanted to talk about, and they could approach maybe people that aren't quite so open about the topic, maybe, that they could approach them with a bit more confidence, or a lot more confidence, and that they can engage in those conversations and be less apprehensive about it. So I hope we serve that purpose, as well as being a great gem fair. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks so much for sharing. So we do want to kind of loop everybody else in. Lisa, I see you in the chat wanting to add something real quick. First, though, we'd like to do another poll. We, as I mentioned when Jalnar brought it up, we kind of want to move into a direction of getting a sense for what are some of the red flags that we look for that would tell us to not work with certain vendors, and how do we reach a place of community accountability in those situations. So we want to do one more poll with y'all, and then we can call on some more of you to share your thoughts. Thanks.
I'll put the code again in the chat. So what is a deal breaker, guys, to you in deciding whether to work with a vendor or not? We'd love to know your thoughts. Just quick keywords. Mhm. No proof. Hostility, of course. Attitude. Gut feeling, very important. Stonewalling, blame, disrespect, slimy,
Oh, yes.
massage.
Dismissiveness. Oh. Mhm.
Super interesting. No knowledge, yeah. Excellent, thank you. Do you want me to do the next one, Anna, as well?
Yeah, so I think this leads right into this next one, and then, you know, for any of our guests who'd like to speak to it, as well as anybody else here, we are looking for what accountability can look like in these situations.
So when is that something that requires community action and accountability? What is it? What would spark community action immediately?
And so a little clarity on what we're asking here. Our last meeting ended on a note that revealed, despite all of our efforts to push conversations into the positive realm, there are moments where we are going to have to turn away. There are going to be lines that, you know, can't, you know, you have to put a line in the sand to say, I'm not going to work with this vendor. I'm not going to work with this manufacturer for X, Y reason. So what we're curious about, building on the last question, is like, when do you want to call on the team? What is it? What would happen? What is an experience that you would have where you would say, whoa, 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 we need a group to get together and say something about this. We need action. So we're trying to get a sense of where it goes from, I can navigate this on my own, to we need team intervention.
Mistreatment, harm, racism,
Hostility, lying. Dishonest claims.
anything else, guys, that you guys want to add before we proceed?
Yeah, it's a good start.
Gross mistreatment, egregious false claims. Yeah, definitely.
And so some of those are how you are treated on an individual level. And then some of those are how the supply chain, you know, along what the treatment looks like along the supply chain. So we have
Awesome. Thank you.
Places.
Green
Thanks for that. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Monica just dropped something in the chat that kind of brings me to the other part of this question. So for example, at AGTA, there is a mechanism for reporting offensive behavior, false claims and such. But in a lot of other situations, we don't have that mechanism, that grievance mechanism. So what we're kind of trying to gauge here is how do we, as a community, kind of become that mechanism in certain situations, right? Like, can we, as a group of people who care here, use our community and our joint voices to make a difference in situations where we don't have that mechanism in place?
And even like starting a list of vendors that people have had really negative experiences with or know things about could be helpful. Just, I mean, everybody knows a little bit about a couple companies, but not all of us know everyone. So it could be helpful to sort of know what other people's experiences with specific companies is like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and off of that, I feel like there's the more egregious stuff, but there's also like at Tucson especially, I found that like, how do you know, there's such a so much information about each vendor that we all don't have access to. So just having a list of what, like folks that are trying to do good or trying to do supportive things, to have a list of that too, I think would be helpful. Because I appreciate the like, when does the community need to step up for accountability and watchdog stuff? But then I think on the front end, how can we help support accessibility and things on the front end so we don't get to those points as well as often? And I don't want to try too much, but I'm also thinking about ethical gem fair. Like, I love it, and I feel like it was groundbreaking for our sourcing. But I'm also curious, like, how can we invite more people into that group? Or what is the goal of that group? Is it to have the most suppliers who are doing ethical work, or is it just, you know, a small group of the, you know, ethical metalsmiths friends? So like, yeah, how do we keep that space open for inviting new voices to the table? And what voices do we have access to, and who doesn't have access to, like, even know about it?
Could I maybe just jump in just as
Yeah.
and I'm by no means the end all be all voice of the ethical gem suppliers. However, we have had a lot of conversations around this. We have both been approached by designers, makers who would like to see additional categories or additional gemstones represented, but we've also been approached by companies, but we often have never heard of them before. We have no context at all about who they are, how they do business, we've never traveled and had feet on the ground of where they say they're sourcing from and under what conditions, let alone how it's cut. So we've been very, very challenged to come up with what is the criteria that we would establish outside of this group of known people who all have either interconnected relationships or have actually physically been to where some of them are operating. So we kind of have some knowledge there. It's a very difficult thing to vet gemstone suppliers, even when you're in the industry, and all of us have day jobs and are very active in the overall community. So it's really difficult to figure out how do we vet these suppliers. We have made a decision right at the moment that the way that we would allow other suppliers to make their goods available is if I physically said, I know this person and I'm going to bring their goods in. And in a way, it is my own integrity that is vouching for this supplier versus bringing in them under their company name and their umbrella, because there's so much kind of risk involved in making those kind of claims and assumptions. So I wouldn't necessarily look to see us growing by leaps and bounds. We all have no interest in being a trade show umbrella organizer, making money off of people having a table at the show, right? Like, that is just not where we are at. We are just trying to create a supportive atmosphere of like-minded suppliers, but there is a limit to how much we can actually kind of physically vet. And on that vetting subject, that's also been something we've struggled with at Ethical Metalsmiths, to come up with, how do we say a supplier is, worthy of purchasing from? We have kind of tried it. We've dipped our toe in. We have actually pulled that toe back out. and are trying to develop resources that would allow you, and like this as well, where it's hard to do a list as nice and easy and a checklist, like as wonderful as that would be. The realities around that, the complexities around that is really, really hard to do. So our thought is, at least on the ethical metalsmith side, is we have the forum that allows you to share maybe stories and resources. It's a slippery slope if you want to start, using that also as a forum to say, hey, I didn't have such a great experience with someone, but there is that possibility, I guess, with the forum. And then also developing, taking our, say, supplier self-assessment that we put a lot of thought and energy into, and allowing you to have access to that document so that you can actually ask those questions yourself, pulling out and parsing out the things that are important to your values. So it's difficult to do in practice. We're still navigating this. I just want to kind of give that perspective, both from a supplier standpoint, but also from an EM standpoint. It's been really challenging to do that.
I really hear that, Monica. It's a challenging situation overall. And I think as a community, there is room for calling out, as Jalnar was saying. There is room and need for it in egregious instances. I completely agree with that. That's not going to be the action that everybody wants to take or everybody is comfortable with taking, but I think it is necessary as a community, as well as supporting and uplifting the positive work. I definitely see where that is not something that ethical metalsmiths, for example, as an organization can do. Like, it feels to me as more of like a grassroots action. But yeah, it's really good to hear all of these perspectives. Christina, this time flew by. We have about 6 minutes left. What do you think? Lisa, I know you've been waiting patiently. You wanted to add something. So maybe, yeah, what do you think, Christina?
Yeah, Lisa, you can unmute.
Okay, so Don, thank you. Go ahead, Christina, you want to say something?
I just wanted to say one last thing in case we run over that. Gina, we're seeing your comments in the chat too, and we'll incorporate it into the takeaways. In the event that we get cut off. So we'll come back if we have time. Go ahead.
Okay, so what I wanted to tell you all is I was not at Tucson, which I viscerally missed. I think it is an extraordinary experience. A few things, and as maybe most of you know, I'm not a supplier and I'm not a jeweler. However, I love both spheres of endeavor. And there were a few things I heard in the conversation that were exceedingly relevant. You may be so used to talking amongst yourself in certain ways that you're not hearing them in the same way. But one is the problem with the word ethical. That is a problem. What is ethical and what is responsible, and how do you use them? The concern about the checklist. I also heard a little bit of resonance of, the Nixon list and so on and so forth. And so the care that needs to be exercised in kind of protecting others as well as ensuring integrity. I also wanted to mention that some of the things you're talking about doing are actually mirroring some movements in larger quote unquote industry. And I do not say this critically at all, but the wish to quantify and that relates, and the wish to be able to demonstrate and to prove and to affirm. And that I think is incredibly important. And I think that it's an element of the endeavor that basically, from my perspective, is in some sense a calling card to the world. You know, we do a conference every year. We are planning to do that conference live this year. Thank God. And, you know, I'm happy to talk with whoever is the, you know, the people to talk to about whether, you know, you guys would want to do something at the same time. One of the things that I think is absolutely critical is that the world accept the idea of a portfolio of responsible options. And and probably what goes along with that goes back to something that Monica said, which is ain't nothing like the real thing, baby. The direct contact, the connectivity, the tangibility, these are all critical things. And I think this group has done an extraordinary job. And, you know, I think the world of Christina and colleagues in preserving community, which is something we're deeply committed to. And you mentioned, you know, getting the word out, if you will, to a broader sphere, for whatever it's worth. You know, I stand with you, and we will, you know, we can try to take it farther in whatever way you wish.
Thanks,
And
Lisa.
there's one last thing I want to tell you, which is from William Morris. It's a quote that starts out, "One man with an idea in his head is in danger of being considered a madman." Quote goes all the way on, and it says, why not 100 million and peace upon earth? You and I who agree together, it is we who have to answer that question.
Thank you. Appreciate hearing your summary and points of view on what was talked about today. I wanted to draw all of your attention into the chat. There is, Alyssa, for the sake of time, I'll just summarize what I know about the EM survey. Please copy down the link, send it to everyone you know. The idea is that this is a way to gather information so that sort of the industry can be gauged in its level of awareness, its appetite for, its curiosity about, and so on. Because ultimately, the information will be used for working together to keep movements going forward. So there was a question about, could it be shared? Absolutely, over and over and over again. Yeah. So I did it today. Actually, I have just a little feedback I wanted to send you guys, but I'll do that on another note. And so bringing this whole thing to a close as well, some of the things that we learned today were, you know, there are tools that out there that are available. So what we learned from Sherry Torres does have applicability in the world, if anything, to put people in a point of ease in their spirit when you're asking them questions. You know, it sort of softens the tone when you're talking with them. Sharing information with each other is incredibly important because not everything can be sort of published in this formal way, but the grassroots kind of efforts to share information with each other is really valuable. Holding accountable, this is something that we're going to keep exploring because it was something that came up really strongly in our last session, and it comes up again and again, and it's a difficult and complicated reality. We see that in everyday life, not just in our field. Lisa, you summed it up really well, a portfolio of responsible options. You know, we operate on a spectrum of ways that we can engage depending on the scale of your business, depending on the intent of your business, depending on the style of your jewelry, and so on. So we look forward to being with you again in March. We want to give a special thanks to Zulaikha and Ashley and Jalnar and Will and Monica and Stuart for jumping in. without a prompt with your great information. But it was great to have you all, and thanks for sharing your Tucson experiences. And Gina, I'm looking at you. You put great questions in the chat that we will circulate around and get back to you. So thank you so much.
If you include a blurb about this survey, IEC will post and circulate.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. We'll get that connection.
Okay, and if we can think of some other, like I've got a couple other ideas where, I mean, if the idea is to get as many voices, we will do it. We will get others to do it.
Wonderful. Thank you all again so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, y'all.
Bye.
Take good
Bye-bye.
care.